she was a year younger than she was. She said, I saw on Facebook this lady. I know we're the same age. And she said, she goes, I can't believe I'm going to be. She said, wait a minute, she's wrong. Sorry, you. Not. Except he said it. Maybe she thought she was going to say it. I mean, she was.
All right. Good morning, everyone. It's about time to get started for our Sunday morning Bible class. Glad to see everyone out here. We'll hold off on all of our announcements and prayer requests until we get to our worship hour. So as we get ready to go to class, let's go to God in prayer. Our Heavenly Father, we thank you so much for this wonderful Lord's Day that you've given us. A chance to come here and hear a portion of your word and take it to our hearts. Lord, we are so blessed to have these wonderful teachers who work so hard to prepare their lessons. And may we hear that lesson with an open heart, open mind, and a chance to take that word out to the world. Lord, as we begin our class this morning, we pray we do all things pleasing to you. In Jesus' name, amen. We'll go to class.
Good morning, everyone. Please be turning to the book of Deuteronomy. We will be continuing our study in chapter 32 of the book of Deuteronomy. In case you don't know, there's only 34 chapters in the book, so we're just 2 away from the end of the book of Deuteronomy, but there's quite a bit of information still left for us to glean in these final chapters. The final chapters are basically the conclusion of the book. Chapter 32 specifically is the recording of a song that God asked Moses to write. It's called the Song of Moses, and basically what that song, or we probably think about it more as a poem, but after all songs are usually poems too. The idea of the Song of Moses was that he was putting together a history of God's relationship with Israel, so that in the distant future, when Israel rejected God, there would be this song, there would be this record that could be easily remembered by most people when writing was not very common and people didn't have ready access to the scriptures, but they could remember the words of this song. And we mentioned last week, of course, that it's always easier to remember things when they're in song. It's easier to memorize, or it's not easy to memorize the name of the 12 apostles, but it's pretty easy to learn the song. Jesus called them one by one, Peter, Andrew, James, and John. And so that's the basic purpose and reason for why God wanted Moses to write this song. Now, basically, we were in the first main paragraph of the song, which is verses 4 through 9, when we stopped last week. So we want to pick up there. If somebody could reread verses 4 through 9 for us, please.
The rock, his work is perfect, for all his ways are justice. A God of faithfulness and without iniquity, just and upright is he. They have dealt corruptly with him. They are no longer his children because they are blemished. They are a crooked and twisted generation. Do you thus repay the Lord, you foolish and senseless people? Is it not your Father who created you, who made you and established you? Remember the days of old. Consider the years of many generations. Ask your Father, and he will show you, your elders, and they will tell you. When the Most High gave to the nations their inheritance, when he divided mankind, he fixed the borders of the peoples according to the number of the sons of God. But the Lord's portion is his people, Jacob his allotted heritage.
Okay, in the first 3 verses, the introduction, Moses has started off talking about the greatness of God. And here he continues to talk about God's greatness and all that he had done for his people Israel. He refers to God as the rock. And we mentioned briefly last week that the idea of a rock would be a place of refuge, a place of security, a place of protection. From a military standpoint, it was very important to be able to have somewhere one could go for that, and the rock would be that. And God, as the rock of Israel, he was a perfect, just, faithful God who was without iniquity. So Moses is basically laying down the fact here that Israel had the perfect God. They had the perfect place of refuge. They had the perfect one to give them security and to give them protection. And what would be their response to having a perfect God in charge of them? Their response, he continues on, is that they would fail to embrace God. As great as God was, it seems like they just repeatedly and continually did not want to do what God said. They did not want to serve him. They did not want to do what was really in their own best interest. And they would deal corruptly, Moses says, with God. And they would do that by serving other gods, either instead of or in addition to Jehovah. And showing, when they served other gods, Moses said, showing that they were no longer his children because of this blemish that they had. And the blemish was idolatry. And it was the fact of their idolatry, their turning their back on God, that they proved they were not really his children after all. Moses says that these future Israelites who are going to turn their backs on God will be a foolish and senseless people because of how they have treated God. And this is especially true after all that God has done for them and how God has been so good to them, delivering them from bondage where? Out of Egypt, leading them out, making a nation of them. Just a bunch of slaves who had been in Egypt, he was able to make a nation for them. He was able to lead them in and conquer Canaan. And over we see it wasn't because they were a great military power. They couldn't have stood up to any of those Canaanite nations if they were just relying upon their own military strength. It was because of God that they were able to achieve all the victory and all the success that they had achieved. And yet, after all God had done for them, they turned their back on him. They walked away from him. They refused to acknowledge him as their God. Their ingratitude, Moses is saying here, would be beyond belief. It just doesn't make real sense that they would turn their backs on one who had been so good to them. He talks about the Old Testament nation of Israel, the fact that it was a nation created by God. They did not make their own nation. It was God who created them. And we notice here that Moses, in describing the creation of Israel, depicts God as their father. I know there's a lot of people who say the concept of God as the father of his people is basically a New Testament concept, that it wasn't really there in the Old Testament. Well, that would be wrong, because what does Moses say here? What was God to his people? He was their father. The fatherhood of God of his people is very much an Old Testament concept. It didn't begin in the New Testament. It's the imagery of God as the Father. That would make Israel what? If God's the Father, Israel is the child, or the children, or the sons, or the daughters of God. And that's a concept that is used by later prophets also to teach that idea of God as the father of Israel. We look at a prophet like Hosea, And we remember all of Hosea's trials and tribulations, etc. And yet we have in the book of Hosea, Hosea mouths the words or records the words that God said. And God said this, when Israel was a child, I loved him. And out of Egypt I called my son. Now, that's a reference to Israel, God loving him and calling his son, Israel, out of Egypt. That's out of the Egyptian bondage that God had called the Israelites. He made them his children. He made them his people. We always talk about the chosen people, but they were also sons and daughters to God as well in this imagery. Of course, that was the immediate application of Hosea's message about out of Egypt I call my son, but we know through the method of predictive prophecy that it also had another reference, did it not? It had a reference to Jesus. After Mary and Joseph and Jesus left Judea because they were afraid of Herod and his son and others, where did they go? They didn't go directly to Nazareth. When they left the Bethlehem area, they went somewhere else first. They went to Egypt. And then it was later that they moved from Egypt to Nazareth. And I believe it's Matthew quotes from Hosea here and says, this was part of the prophecy in there that out of Egypt I have called my son, referring to the fact that God's only begotten son, Jesus Christ, would have spent time in Egypt and came out of Egypt as well. So that's a twofold prophecy, as many of them often are. But the point is, Israel was God's son, his children, and he had that parent-child relationship with him, and they were supposed to have that same relationship with him, of course, which they refused to do. Moses calls on the future generations of Israel who would be departing from God to remember their history, to ask the older people who have longer memories, and they would tell them about the God of Israel, about how they should serve him because of what he had done for them, if for no other reason, just out of sheer gratitude for what God had done. Now, in verse 8, we find a statement about God exercising his will and his judgment. Moses says he allotted areas to the various nations. And he said this allotment of where they would be and what land they would occupy took place when he divided mankind. And that division of mankind is a reference back to the division of people by language that followed an incident that happened where? The Tower of Babel. And so that's what he's talking about. It was there that God confused the languages of the people, and God also allotted or put out where they would go and where they would live when they separated from each other. And it says God fixed their territories of all these nations according to some translations say, according to the number of the sons of God. Other translations say, according to the number of the sons of Israel. If you have ESV and some of the newer translations, it almost always has according to the number of the sons of God. King James, New King James, those that follow the text that the King James Version used will have sons of Israel. Now, the reason for this difference in the English translations between sons of God and sons of Israel is because there are differences in the ancient texts the ancient Hebrew text as well. There's two different readings. When we look at the standard text that the Old Testament comes from, which is called the Masoretic text, which was taken from a group of Jews who slavishly preserved the Old Testament scriptures, it has the sons of Israel as the reading in that. But a couple of other ancient copies of the Old Testament. One was the Greek translation called the Septuagint that happened a couple of hundred years before Jesus was born, when the Hebrew Old Testament was translated into Greek because more and more Jews didn't speak Hebrew and spoke Greek, so they provided a copy of the Old Testament for them. It has the sons of God as the reading here, and so does the copies of Deuteronomy found among the Dead Sea Scrolls, which date from roughly a little before the time that Jesus was born. So we have this difference between these Old Testament versions that were extant in the ancient world. Now, what the problem has been is that this difference has led some people to come up with some fanciful ideas. And there are those who latch on that term sons of God here and say that's a reference to angelic beings. Are angels ever referred to as sons of God in the scriptures? Yeah, they are. There are a few references to that, but it depends on the context. And we have to consider what the context here. And here I don't think the context has anything to do with angels at all. Is he talking about angels in this Song of Moses? No, angels are nowhere near here. Who's he talking about? Talking about Israel and God. And that's the context we need to mention. But those who believe this is a reference to angels, they've come up with the idea that what this is describing is a big angelic conference that God called together to advise him on how he should divide up the land among the various nations. And that's what it means, that he divided it according to the sons of God. He based it upon what their recommendations were to him. Others say, no, that's not what it means. It's still talking about angels. But here he's talking about the fact that the allocations were made and that God selected the number of nations that there would be based on the number of the angelic beings at this conference. That is just sheer speculation, well beyond anything that could be gained from a strict reading of the text here. Again, let's let the Bible tell us what it means. It's talking about Israel here. This is a song about Israel. So I believe that both readings, whether it's Son of Israel or Sons of God, are still referring to the nation of Israel. Certainly Sons of Israel would refer to whom? To Israel. Okay, what about Sons of God? Well, didn't we just see in verse 6 that Moses had called God the Father of Israel? So what would that make Israel? They make them the sons. So it's not a far-fetched thing. He's already introduced that idea in this same paragraph back in verse 6. So somewhere along the line, the ancient Hebrew manuscripts, they got a little difference from one another. Some saying sons of Israel, some said sons of God. I think they mean exactly the same thing. Because the sons of Israel, the nation of Israel, were indeed the sons of God. And God was their father. So when we consider that as we read here, then it becomes what I think is a fairly simple explanation of what Moses is talking about and what he is meaning here. What he is saying is that God did allocate the lands, the territories, to the various nations following the Tower of Babel situation. But when he did those allocations, he did so in anticipation of how much land he was going to later need to make available for the sons of Israel, for the sons of God. In other words, did God know at the Tower of Babel that he was later going to create the nation of Israel? Absolutely. This is telling us he took that in mind because he knew it, and that he was making his arrangements with the allocation of the properties and the territories of all the nations in view of the fact that there would be a land for this nation, the sons of Israel, the sons of God, that he would be ready. That land would be ready. It would be accounted for. It would be allocated at the time that he was ready to establish them as a nation. Any questions or comments on that? Okay, Moses concludes this paragraph with the statement that God's portion was his people. And he specifically mentions Jacob as the people who were part of God's portion. Jacob's name was later changed. What was it changed to? Israel. So Moses is saying, who are God's people? Israel. Who are the sons of God? Israel. They're all wrapped up in the same thing. What Moses is saying here is simply Israel was God's chosen people. And here again, this fits into the overall message of this song of Moses. The fact that God has done so much for the people of Israel. And what was their response to all of the good that he's done? Any questions or comments on this paragraph? Okay, let's move on to the next paragraph, verses 10 through 14. If someone could read that for us, please.
He encircled him, he cared for him. He kept him as the apple of his eye. Like an eagle that stirs up its nest, that flutters over its young, spreading out its wings, catching them, bearing them on its pinions. The Lord alone guided him. No foreign god was with him.
Yes, through 14.
14, okay. He made him ride on the high places of the land, and he ate the produce of the field. And he suckled him with honey out of the rock, and oil out of the flinty rock, curds from the herd, and milk from the flock, with fat of lambs, rams of Bashan, and goats with his very finest of the wheat. And you drank foaming wine made from the blood of the grape.
Okay. He's continuing on here to describe what Moses had done. Moses is describing what God had done for his chosen people, which is the way he was describing them at the end of the previous paragraph. And verse 10 is basically describing God's care for Israel while they were wandering in the wilderness. When they were in the wilderness, could they stop and plant crops? No. But God provided food for them in the form of what? Manna and quail, and many other things while they were in the wilderness. Remember that their clothing did not wear out, their shoes did not wear out. He was quite generous in providing for them in the wilderness. God encircled them to protect them from other nations. We have that same picture. We all watched, at least those of my generation, watched a lot of Westerns growing up on TV. And when the Indians were attacking the wagon train, what shape did they turn the wagon train into? Into a circle, because it was easily defendable. And that's basically the idea here. God is encircling them. He's the protection. He's the wagons that are surrounding the people of Israel in order to protect them from other nations. After all, was Israel stronger than these other nations? Not at all. They could not have survived without God's protection. Those nations or any other thing could not harm them. And it said he did this because Israel was the apple of his eye. That's an expression that we are all familiar with. It's one that's still pretty common today. When we use it, it's an idiom. It's an expression that doesn't mean what it literally says. It means something else. And basically, the apple of our eye is describing a person or a thing that is very deeply cherished. If something's the apple of our eye, we think pretty highly of it, don't we? We love it above all others, if it's the apple of our eye or the person, and we protect it with great care. And so that's the description through apple of the eye that Moses is making about God and his feelings towards Israel. He deeply cherished them. He loved them. He wanted to protect them. Incidentally, in English, the apple of the eye is a reference to the pupil that's in the eye. And the pupil is vital for sight, and therefore we highly protect our eyes, don't we? And the pupil that's in it, and that's where the expression started. In Hebrew, it's not apple, though. In Hebrew, the expression is the little man of the eye. But again, that's a reference to the pupil. Unless you've been dilated with drops, how big is the pupil? Pretty small. So it's the little man, the little thing within the eye. But that all refers to the same thing. It's an idiom, the apple of the eye, for protecting that which we cherish and love, highly valuable, and want to care for. God's care for, Moses continues on, and protection of Israel is also compared to an eagle who is protecting her young, keeping them from danger, making sure that nothing can get up in the nest to harm them. So we're seeing image after image showing God's love, his care, and the protective measures that he is taking for Israel. Moses next makes the point that it was Jehovah alone who did all of this for Israel. It was Jehovah alone who brought Israel out of Egypt. It was Jehovah alone who gave them the law at Mount Sinai. It was Jehovah alone that brought them through the wilderness and who was giving them the land of Canaan. There was no other god or idol that did anything for the Israelites from the time they came out of Egypt to the time that they entered into Canaan. No other god was involved in freeing them from Egyptian bondage. No other god was involved in leading them through the wilderness. No other god was involved in giving them the land of Canaan except for Jehovah. Why then would they ever want to turn to gods other than Jehovah? And that's the message that Moses is trying to impress upon. Next, God is said by Moses to have had Israel ride on the high places of the land. That's an image, again, of God giving Israel the best land that Canaan had to offer. When a military unit moves in, do they want to take the high land or the low land? They always want to take the high land. It's much better to defend. It's a lot better. My dad used to always talk about the fact that it was better to live on a hill than in a hole. Just the idea that you wanted a house that was a little bit higher. The worst thing he thought you could have was a house where it sloped down the driveway to the house. He thought that was the worst you could possibly get. He always wanted to be on the higher ground. And And that's what Moses is saying here. The higher ground is better. And God gave them what was better when they had Israel. After all, it was a land flowing with milk and honey. A couple of pretty good things that those are. For the rest of the paragraph here, Moses is describing God's blessings to Israel within the land of Canaan. Briefly, he talks about these blessings. He said once they were in Canaan, they were blessed with bountiful crops. They had honey and oil out of rocks. Do we normally get honey and oil out of rocks? Not talking about petroleum here. We're talking about olive oil, cooking oil. No, you don't expect so what he's actually saying in that illustration is they got honey and oil well beyond what could reasonably be expected from what their circumstances were. He gave them dairy products. He gave them lambs and rams and goats. He gave them the finest of wheat and the very best of the grape juice. The ESV talks about the foaming as the adjective it uses to describe that here, and that's basically a conveyance of the appearance of the grape juice when it is heated in the process of processing, or the processing of it. That was how it would look, and that's why you see foaming that's mentioned there. Questions or comments on the blessings that God gave to Israel? Okay, the next paragraph begins with verse 15, and it begins with the word but. And that tells us there's going to be a drastic change in what Moses is talking about. Someone read verses 15 through 18 for us, please.
But Jeshua grew fat and kicked. You grew fat, stout, and sleek. Then he forsook God, who made him, and scoffed at the rock of his salvation. They stirred him to jealousy with strange gods. With abominations they provoked him to anger. They sacrificed to demons that were no gods, to gods they had never known, to new gods that had come recently, from your fathers had never dreaded. You were unmindful of the rock that bore you, and you forgot the God who gave you birth.
Okay. Here we have, as I said, a paragraph that begins with but. That usually is to set up a contrast, and exactly what Moses is doing here. He's setting a contrast up between God's gracious care and God's bountiful blessings that he has given them to Israel, and the contrast is with Israel's response to all of the good things that God had given to them. He begins by saying, Jeshurun grew fat and kicked. Now, who is this Jeshurun that's being mentioned here? Well, actually, it's another name for Israel. It's only used here in the book of Deuteronomy and the book of Isaiah. The prophet there also uses it to refer to Israel. The word means the upright one. Now, was Israel actually the upright one in their existence? No, but they should have been. They should have been the upright one. And by using this term to describe how Israel should have been, I think perhaps Moses here is using it as an accusation that they have failed to live up to the calling that which they had been called and the name that had been applied to Israel. And we see that Moses attributes some of Israel's faithlessness to the fact that they became prosperous materially. They became prosperous materially because who blessed them? Because God blessed them. And that's a good thing most of the time. It depends on how one reacts to the blessings that they have. It appears that Israel reacted erroneously to their blessings, and because they were materially prosperous, they lost their dependence on God. They lost their trust in God. They probably lost the sense that all that they enjoyed in life came from God. And they probably began to believe that they had actually earned this material prosperity for themselves. And once they decided that it wasn't really God who was responsible for what they had, it was they themselves that were responsible for what they had, then this would certainly make it easier to turn away from Jehovah and to serve other gods. Do people still have a problem with forgetting God when things are going well in their lives? You know, I read once on a church reader board where they posted that some people must think God is a lawyer. They only go to him when they're in trouble. And that's certainly true. There's a lot of people that as long as things are going well, they are pretty much on their own, don't have much interest in God or in doing the things that God would like them to do. That, according to Moses, is what was going to happen in Israel. They were going to have that prosperity. They were going to do well. And in their prosperity, they were going to turn away from God. Moses again here describes God as the rock of Israel's salvation, because God was the only place of real security and real protection that Israel had. And yet Moses said they would scoff at him, they would refuse to do his will, they would not act in their own best interests at all. Not only, Moses said, did they go and worship other gods, that was bad enough, but they also engaged in the sensual and abominable practices that these other gods used in their worship, like the use of prostitution as worship to the fertility gods, like the sacrificing their children as burnt offerings to other gods. Did a king of Judah ever offer his own children as burnt offerings? Yes. Manasseh, Hezekiah's father, is recorded as doing that. And all of this abomination and the practices that they engaged to as part of idolatry caused God to be very jealous and angry with them. Moses then identifies these gods as demons instead of being real gods. Number one, we know for sure they were not real gods. The idea of demons and using that here, I think, is an identification of the one who was really behind all of the idolatry in the ancient world, the one who was tempting and encouraging people to accept idolatry, to engage in all the sensual and abominable practices that were done in its name. And who would that one have been? That would have been Satan. And here Moses is laying it right back to Satan's door, saying these gods were like demons. They were part of Satan's plan, part of Satan's program to lead people away from God. Moses then makes the point that these idols, these other false gods, were actually late arrivals on the scene when it came to Egypt. They were not there when Israel became a nation in the wilderness. They only became acquainted with them when they moved into Canaan and failed to drive out and destroy all of the Canaanites that was there. This basically is a repeat of the same concept that he mentioned back in verse 12, that it was God alone who was with them at the beginning, not these idols. Israel, he said, was so ungrateful to God that they abandoned the true God who had made them a nation and turned to worship other gods that weren't even there when God had made the nation out of him. The height of ingratitude is being described here. Questions or comments?
Where it says the rock that bore you, which is also in some translations used as rock, the bore being the father, the rock that fathered you, references back to, verse number 7,
Right.
that you were mindful of the rock that maybe fathered you, and you forgot the God who gave you birth.
Now, usually rock is always here a reference to God, in that Paul makes a statement that the rock that was with them in the wilderness, he identifies it with Jesus Christ, but we're still talking divinity here that was with these people. I think we're going to stop there because the first bell's already rung and we're at the end of a paragraph. The next paragraph is an interesting one because the next paragraph gets into Moses has laid out the case in this song for what God has done for Israel, how Israel has responded to what he's done, and then the next paragraph is how God is responding back to Israel's unfaithfulness. So Lord willing, we'll pick up and study that next week. Thank you very much.